Hi, everyone. My name's Noah Rosenblum, and I'm an applied sports psychology master's student who's been mentored throughout the program and on this project by Dr. Brian Zuliger. So this research project is the psychology of developing and maintaining a championship culture from the perspectives of championship coaches. So first and foremost, defining culture is really difficult. It's this esoteric term that's used in sport, it's used outside of sport, and it's really dependent on the context with which it's being used. So this is Minnesota head football coach PJ Fleck on how he defines culture.
This is that word that's overused. Now, how do I define culture? Connecting people. That's it. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. That's it. Connecting people. That's what cultures do. Whether you're in a culture in France and you live in Paris and you speak French, that's a culture. Whether you're in your actual own team meeting room, there's a culture there. Now, whether you can define it or not, that is the aspect. That is key. Whether you all speak the same language, that has to matter. If you go to France and you do not speak French, you will not be able to be involved with the culture. You won't be able to connect with people. You'll communicate, shaking your head yes, waving, right? Yes and no, that's it. But you will not form a connection. When you have a culture, you are connecting. You are all on the same page, same language. We define everything in our program.
All right, so the two main takeaways from that clip are the importance of defining culture first and foremost, and then what is the language, the common language that he's discussing. And that was what we really set out to find in this project, is what are the psychological characteristics that make a culture a championship culture? How do you develop those characteristics? And then once you've developed them, how do you maintain those characteristics? So first, the definition of culture. It's a pattern of shared basic assumptions that has worked well enough to be considered valid and therefore taught to new members of a group as the correct way to perceive, think, feel, and behave. So once again, that's great, but we want to figure out what are those shared basic assumptions? What is the common language that was referred to in the previous video clip? So some previous research on culture and the importance that it plays is culture is a predominant ingredient in winning championships, as it significantly shapes member cognition, behavior, development, well-being, and performance. And then also factors such as organizational climate and culture have a significant impact on performance all the way to the Olympic level. So whatever this construct is, that culture is really important to behavior, performance, decision-making, and it's also really valuable from low level of sport all the way up to the highest level. So in order to find out what these psychological characteristics were, we interviewed 5 coaches who had all won multiple championships. We asked them semi-structured, open-ended interview questions. These coaches had 78 combined national or state championships, 176 years of combined coaching experience, and it was a diverse group of coaches who coached cross country, track and field, wrestling, rowing, swimming. So you had coaches who have coached individual athletes, they've coached in a team context. So it was a very diverse group. The questions that we asked these coaches were, how would you describe your coaching philosophy? How would you describe your leadership style? How do you define and measure success? In your words, what does it mean to have a championship culture? How do you develop a championship culture within your program? Once you developed a championship culture, what have you done and what do you continue to do to maintain it? Have your coaching methods changed over the years? And if they had, we asked them to describe the changes that they made and why they made them. We asked what psychological aspects they felt were necessary to cultivate in the athletes as part of developing and maintaining a championship culture. And then we asked whatever those psychological aspects were, how did they develop those within the athletes? So these are the higher and lower order themes that were illuminated from the interviews. And I'll read out the 7 higher order themes, and then I'll get into some quotes from each ones that encompass the lower order themes. And the higher order themes were creating buy-in, the coach's interpersonal skills, living a lifestyle of excellence, continuous learning throughout the organization, upholding high standards, the importance and value of team cohesion, and the individual athlete mindset. So first and foremost, and this is probably the most reoccurring theme, is living a lifestyle of excellence. So there never has been a day I don't try my best. And my basic philosophy, not only for coaching and teaching and living, is don't ever get up in the morning without trying your best at everything you do. And I call this the pursuit of excellence. So you have to live a lifestyle of the pursuit of excellence always. And this was the most common theme. All 5 coaches mentioned it ad nauseum. These coaches, they weren't just interested in their athletes showing up and being excellent at practice or being excellent in a competition. They made sure to communicate that they valued chasing excellence in the classroom, in terms of recovery, in terms of nutrition, their personal relationships, how they slept, how they walked, how they did everything. This was the most important thing that all 5 coaches mentioned the most frequently. And they also modeled it as well in every single thing that they do. So it wasn't just about sport. It wasn't just about being excellent on a day-to-day basis when they were in the facility. It was how they did everything. So the importance of buy-in. It's not telling them what I need them to do. It's getting them to do it without me having to harp on them and getting them excited to do the work. So it's important for us to have the tools available for them so they can be self-starters and be self-sufficient. And they have to make decisions. It's really their responsibility to get the work done. Coaches aren't making the plays or executing the plays. Athletes are. But it's my responsibility to make sure they have the tools they need. So the really important lower order theme that's really being mentioned here is empowering athlete autonomy. And all of the coaches did this. It wasn't a my way or the highway autocratic approach. They gave the athletes the tools to make the decisions on their own. And they encouraged the athletes to make the decisions on their own. And at the end of the day, it was their responsibility, but it was the coach's responsibility to provide them with the environment, to provide them with the tools, to motivate them to take advantage of the opportunity that they had. So upholding high standards. At my absolute wildest imagination, what could I accomplish? Okay. And we also set a goal that says, yeah, this is probably something that would be exciting and I can do. And frequently he fell between those two, but a lot closer to the imagination goal than to the think I can probably do this goal. So all of these coaches, they upheld high standards. They didn't just have high expectations. They were interested in setting high goals and then training at a high level to achieve those goals. They didn't set goals that anybody could set. They set really, really difficult goals. And even if they're the athletes or the assistant coaches or the coach themselves didn't achieve that goal, they fell closer to achieving that goal than they would have if they had just set a goal that would have been sort of in the middle of the line. And this was really important because all of the coaches frequently talked about how having high expectations is easy. It's easy to say, I want to win a championship, or I want to run this fast or swim this fast. But going outside of your comfort zone and upholding high standards for how they actually trained on a day-to-day basis was one of the most important themes. So team cohesion. I've tried to learn what and how they think. If I try to do that, I think they respect the fact that I'm not just trying to run the crap out of them or that they're pieces of meat. The more I can learn about what makes them tick, the more I can know that, hey, this young lady, both of her parents are deceased, then being able to put an arm around her and say, hey, everything's going to be okay. And this, again, all 5 coaches mentioned this. When these athletes showed up in the facility, or they showed up to practice, or they showed up to competition, it wasn't only about performance and competing and winning. It was about interpersonal relationships and building rapport with each other and taking time to communicate with each other. So if there was a 2-hour practice, they weren't just practicing and working out and training for 2 hours straight. All of these coaches took time out of practice to get to know the individual athletes, to allow the athletes to get to know each other, to allow the assistant coaches to build rapport with the athletes, and so on and so on. They took a significant amount of time and invested time in building rapport with each other. It wasn't only about sport. So continuous learning. I like to see what other coaches are doing. And if I see a good article like on Sports Psych, I'll throw it out in an email and say, hey, take a look at this. That's right, information. A lot of time, they don't have time for that stuff. That's my job to provide that. So once again, this was a frequently reoccurring theme. And there are two really important sub-themes that are occurring here. And the first is coaching education. All of these coaches were interested in growing. They were interested in seeking out information and learning and improving their craft. And then there's a trickle-down effect to the athletes, to the assistant coaches, all throughout the organization. And it allowed the athletes to become more educated because the coach is constantly staying up to date on new information, new ways of doing things. And by doing that, the athletes were also always seeking out improvement by seeing that their coach was modeling that and implementing it on a day-to-day basis. So the coach interpersonal skills. For us, it's all about relationships. It's all about challenging people, but understanding that they're individual people at the same time. So I want to push people to the edge of what they're able to do, but I want to do it through a collaborative process, through a conversation. So here you see the intersectionality of some of the other themes. You have living a lifestyle of excellence, the importance of team cohesion, the coaches valuing continuous learning. They were interested in upholding high standards, but doing it in a way that was individualized. So they wanted what they wanted done in a certain way, but they were willing to choose different paths and approach the athletes in an individualized way in order to help them improve and to get to the inevitable end goal. And the thing about this quote is that a lot of the great coaches that we see presented in the media are presented as these austere characters who are inflexible and unwilling to change. But all of these coaches, they were the complete opposite of that. They were malleable. They're willing to understand the athletes and find what works best for them so that they can improve and in turn improve the team. And they did it through collaboration. They did it through communication. They didn't do it by saying, hey, here's how you do this. And if you don't do it this way, that's too bad. They did the complete opposite of that. So lastly, the athlete's mindset. One of the conversations between sessions was, we're also here to practice resiliency because you need to be resilient in a championship meet. It's a 3 or 4 day meet, prelims and finals. So it's at least 6 sessions, sometimes 8. You've got to find a way to be resilient, to be tough throughout the course of the entire meet. So here you see the most important psychological trait that they've valued in fostering in the athletes is resilience. And the way that they imparted that upon the athletes was by communicating the importance of it consistently in all different situations. So these coaches aren't talking about that they have to go win a meet in the middle of the meet. They're talking about the importance of resilience and practicing resilience, and they discuss it in practice. And it's just constantly communicated throughout to all members of the organization during practice, during competition, during team meetings. It's just a core value, and that core value is consistently communicated. So some discussion about the findings from this. There are a couple of similarities, a couple of differences from some of the previous research in this area. Some of the similarities were the coach's commitment to learning. All of these championship level coaches, they were all interested in growth. And that was one of the most consistent themes. There's a focus on individual growth in the athletes. They weren't worried about winning. They weren't worried about outcomes, whether it was the best player on the team, whether it was the not best player on the team. The goal was the same. They took an egalitarian approach of, I just want to help you improve regardless of how good or not good you may be. And then also empowering athlete autonomy. Again, it wasn't a my way or the highway approach. They empowered the athlete to make the decisions. They empowered the athlete to do the work. The coach was more of a guide in providing the information and the structure with which they can improve. And it was the athlete's job to go and actually do it. So some of the differences from previous research, I thought the coach's interpersonal skills really stuck out to me, specifically their ability to take an individualized approach, to be malleable. And then we really struggled to find a good definition for what I'm about to describe, we wanted to go with positive, but that didn't quite hit the nail on the head. The coaches were positive and the environment was positive, but it was more of a pragmatic approach. If something went wrong, the coaches didn't get angry. They weren't negative. It was more, this is a learning experience, and how can we grow from this experience? It wasn't a toxically positive environment where even if something went right and they won a match or whatnot, it was still, how can we grow? How can we continue to improve, even though we might have won? And then the importance of team cohesion via collaboration and communication. These coaches, they were all amazing communicators. They had great interpersonal skills. They took time. They invested in communicating with their athletes, in getting to know their athletes, in building rapport. That was such an important thing that was mentioned just as much as training or practicing or hard work and effort, was the ability to communicate with each other. So the main conclusions from this study were that, for me, championship cultures, they spent virtually zero time discussing actually winning championships. It was mentioned in over 1,000 lines of interviews. There was one mention of championship winning expectations. Instead, these coaches and these organizations, they were focused on the themes that were mentioned. They were focused on team cohesion. They were focused on continuous learning, on living a lifestyle of excellence. They spent no time actually discussing winning championships. It was all about the investment that was required to achieve that outcome. And once again, the most important and the most frequently mentioned theme from this was not just a desire for chasing excellence exclusive to swimming or basketball or rowing or whatever the sport was, but in chasing excellence in every single thing that you do in life. And these coaches did an amazing job of communicating the importance of transferring what they were doing in sport to the other areas of their life. And that was, again, the most frequently repeated theme. And these coaches genuinely valued that. And they all had really significant relationships with previous athletes. And that was what the athletes and the alumni mentioned as the reason for their passion for the sport, for their continued involvement, and what they took away from their sport experience in these championship cultures.